They told her the Duke had a heart of ice, that he cared for nothing but his title and his gold. But at 3 a.m. on a storm-lashed Tuesday in November 1892, Sebastian St. Clair did the unthinkable. He stood in the rain outside a crumbling parsonage, demanding a priest wake up to perform a marriage that would save a woman from absolute ruin. The bride was shivering not from the cold, but from the secret growing inside her, a secret that belonged to the Duke's own dead brother. Why would a powerful man marry the woman who carried his brother's scandal? The truth was not just about honor. It was about a revenge that had been waiting 10 years to unfold. London, November 14th, 1892. The fog on Fleet Street was so thick you could taste the coal dust on your tongue. But inside the drawing room of the Cavendish residence, the air was suffocating for a different reason. Lady Clara Cavendish sat on the edge of the velvet chaise, her knuckles white as she gripped a crumpled letter. The ink was barely dry, or perhaps it was just smeared by the dampness of her shaking hands. "Dead," she whispered the word, feeling like a stone in her throat. "Arthur is dead." Her maid, a stout woman named Martha, who had raised Clara since her mother passed, paced the floorboards, wringing her apron. "Lord help us, Lady Clara, Lord help us. If the captain is gone, then what becomes of—" She trailed off, her eyes darting to Clara's stomach. It was barely a bump yet, hidden easily beneath the layers of crinoline and silk of her mourning dress. But time was a cruel accountant. It always tallied the truth eventually. Clara was 3 months with child. The child of Captain Arthur St. Clair, the charismatic golden-haired second son of the Ashbourne dynasty. Arthur had promised her everything before he sailed for the colonial skirmishes in the East. He had sworn they would marry upon his return. He had taken her virtue in the rose garden of her father's estate, under the heavy scent of blooming jasmine, swearing that their souls were already wed. But Arthur hadn't come back. A letter from his commanding officer had fallen in the line of duty. "My father will cast me out," Clara said, her voice hollow. Her father, the Earl of Winderley, was a man who valued reputation over breath itself. If he found out his unmarried daughter was carrying a bastard, he wouldn't just disown her. He would ensure she ended up in a workhouse, or worse, an asylum. "We must leave," Martha whispered. "Tonight, before the Earl returns from the club. And go where Martha Who takes in a fallen woman with no coin." A heavy, rhythmic thudding echoed from the front door. The brass knocker slammed once, twice, 3 times. It was past midnight. No decent visitor called at this hour. Clara stood up, smoothing her skirts, panic rising in her chest like bile. "If that is my father—" But it wasn't. When the butler, old and half-deaf, finally opened the heavy oak door, a gust of wind blew out the candles in the hallway. Standing in the threshold, framed by the swirling grey mist of London, was a figure that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in mourning black that seemed to absorb the dim light. He removed his top hat, revealing hair as dark as Arthur's had been gold, and eyes that were not warm and blue, but the color of polished steel. It was Sebastian St. Clair, the Duke of Ashbourne, Arthur's older brother. The Wolf of Westminster, they called him in the tabloids, a man who had tripled his family's fortune through ruthless railway investments, and who hadn't smiled in public since the Queen's Jubilee. "Your Grace," the butler stammered, terrified. Sebastian didn't look at the servant. His gaze locked onto Clara, who was standing at the top of the stairs. He walked past the butler, his cane clicking sharply on the marble floor. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at her. "Pack a bag," he said. His voice was deep, devoid of any emotion. It wasn't a request. Clara gripped the banister. "Your Grace, I have received the news about Arthur. I am devastated." "I am not here to discuss my brother's mortality," Sebastian said, taking a step up. "I said, pack a bag, Lady Clara, unless you wish to explain to your father why you were vomiting into the potted ferns this morning." Clara froze. The blood drained from her face. "How? How do you know?" "I make it my business to know everything that affects the St. Clair name," he replied coldly. "Arthur wrote to me. He wrote a great many things before he died. He told me of his conquest." Clara felt sick. Conquest. Is that what she was? "He loved me," she defended weakly. Sebastian's lip curled a micro-expression of disgust. "He left you ruin. I am here to offer you a salvage operation. My carriage is outside. You have 10 minutes. To go where? To the chapel on the east end. I have a priest waiting. We will be married before the sun rises." Clara stared at him, unable to comprehend the words. "Married to you. Do not mistake this for romance, Clara," Sebastian said, checking his pocket watch. "This is a transaction. You carry a St. Clair child. That child will be the heir to Ashbourne until I sire a legitimate one, or perhaps he will be the only one. I will not have my nephew or niece born in a gutter because my brother was a careless fool." "I cannot marry a man I do not love," Clara whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Sebastian looked at her, his steel eyes softening for just a fraction of a second before hardening again. "Then you are braver than I thought. Stay. Tell your father. Watch your life burn." He turned to walk away. "Wait!" Clara cried out. She looked at Martha, who was nodding frantically from the shadows. She looked at her belly. She had to protect the baby. "I will come," Clara said. "But I have conditions." Sebastian paused, not turning around. "You are in no position to bargain, Lady Clara, but I am listening." "The child," she said, descending the stairs. "You will never treat him, or her, as a bastard. You will claim the child as yours, in name and in blood." Sebastian turned then. "That is the only reason I am here. Now move. The license expires at dawn." The wedding was a grim affair. St. Jude's was a small, draughty chapel that smelled of damp wood and old incense. The priest, a nervous man named Father Thomas, fumbled through the Latin rites, his eyes darting between the imposing duke and the pale, trembling woman beside him. There were no flowers. There was no music. There was only the sound of the rain hammering against the stained glass and the scratching of the quill as Clara signed the register. Clara St. Clair, Duchess of Ashbourne. The ink looked like blood in the candlelight. As they exited the chapel, the first grey streaks of dawn were cutting through the London fog. Sebastian helped her into his carriage, his grip on her elbow firm but impersonal, like he was handling a piece of expensive luggage. They sat opposite each other as the carriage lurched forward, heading north toward the Ashbourne country estate. The silence was heavy, thick with unspoken accusations. "Why?" Clara finally asked, breaking the quiet. She pulled her shawl tighter. "You hated Arthur. Everyone knew it. You hadn't spoken in years. Why save his child?" Sebastian stared out the window, watching the city give way to the muddy roads of the countryside. "I did not hate Arthur," he said quietly. "I knew him. There is a difference. He was a hero." Clara snapped her grief, making her bold. "He died fighting for the crown." Sebastian turned his gaze to her. It was intense, dissecting. Arthur died in a duel over a game of cards in Bombay, Clara. The line of duty story was something I purchased from the War Office for £5,000 to spare my mother the shame. The air left Clara's lungs. You lie. I have the report in my study at Blackwood Hall. You are welcome to read it. Sebastian leaned forward, his voice dropping. Arthur was charming, Clara. He was beautiful and golden, and he made people feel like they were the center of the universe. But he was reckless. He gambled away his inheritance at 20, and he gambled with people's hearts until the day he died. I am here to clean up his mess. Again. Clara wanted to scream at him to slap that arrogant look off his face, but the doubt wormed its way in. Arthur had been elusive about his finances. He had asked to borrow a brooch of hers once, claiming he needed to have the setting fixed, only to never return it. I loved him, she maintained, though her voice wavered. You loved a reflection, Sebastian said, leaning back and closing his eyes. Get some sleep, Duchess. We have a long journey, and when we arrive at Blackwood, remember one thing. What is that? We are happy. To the servants, to the tenants, to my mother. We are a love match, a whirlwind romance that could not wait. If you falter, if you look at me with fear or disgust in public, the rumors will start. And if they suspect the timeline of your pregnancy, this was all for nothing. They arrived at Blackwood Hall 2 days later. It was a massive Gothic structure of dark stone sitting on a cliff overlooking a churning grey sea. It was beautiful but intimidating, much like its master. The staff was lined up to greet them. The housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, looked at Clara with sharp, assessing eyes. "Welcome home, Your Grace," Mrs. Higgins said, curtsying. We're not expecting a mistress so soon." "Love waits for no schedule, Mrs. Higgins," Sebastian said, smoothly placing a hand on the small of Clara's back. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. It was warm, possessive. "Prepare the master suite. Her Grace is exhausted." "The master suite?" Mrs. Higgins raised an eyebrow. "Together, Your Grace. We are married, are we not?" Sebastian's tone dared her to question him. Clara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She hadn't thought of the sleeping arrangements. That night in the cavernous bedroom dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in heavy velvet. Clara stood by the fireplace, still in her traveling clothes. Sebastian entered from the dressing room, having removed his coat and cravat. He looked more human without the armor of his formal wear, but no less dangerous. "You can take the bed," he said, walking toward a chaise lounge near the window. He threw a blanket over it. You aren't sleeping in the bed?" Clara asked, surprised. "I gave you my name, Clara. I did not demand your body," Sebastian said, lying down on the chaise and turning his back to her. "I will not touch you. You are carrying my brother's child. I am not a monster." Clara stared at his broad back. For a man who claimed to be acting only out of duty, there was a strange, rigid honor in him. "Good night, Sebastian," she whispered. It was the first time she had used his given name. He didn't answer. But in the middle of the night, Clara woke up screaming. She was back in the rose garden, but the roses were dead, and Arthur was laughing at her, his face melting into a skull. She bolted upright, gasping for air, sweat drenching her nightgown. Before she could even catch her breath, Sebastian was there. He was kneeling by the bed, his hand gripping hers. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with sleep, but urgent. "Clara, breathe. You are safe." "He's dead," she sobbed, the reality crashing down on her again in the darkness. "He's really dead." Sebastian didn't pull away. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply held her hand, his thumb rubbing circles over her knuckles, grounding her in the present. "Yes," he said softly, "but you are alive. And so is the child." For the first time, Clara looked at him and didn't see the cold Duke. She saw a man who was also grieving a man carrying a burden of secrets that was crushing him. "Why do you hate yourself so much?" she whispered. Sebastian stiffened. He pulled his hand away as if burned and stood up, retreating into the shadows. "Go to sleep, Clara. Tomorrow the Dowager Duchess arrives. And if you think I am cold, wait until you meet my mother." The Dowager Duchess, Beatrice St. Clair, did not arrive quietly. She arrived like a siege engine. 3 days after Clara and Sebastian had settled into the uneasy rhythm of their life at Blackwood Hall, the sound of carriage wheels crunching over the gravel driveway shattered the morning calm. Clara was in the library trying to distract herself with a book of poetry she couldn't focus on. Sebastian was at his desk reviewing ledgers. When the carriage was announced, his pen stopped mid-stroke. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "She is early," he muttered, closing the ledger with a snap. "Remember, Clara, you are the Duchess of Ashbourne. You outrank her now. Do not let her smell fear. She feeds on it." Clara smoothed her skirts, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had heard stories of Beatrice St. Clair, a woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of Victorian society for 40 years and never once capsized. They met her in the Grand Hall. Beatrice was a small woman, shrunken by age, but her eyes were sharp, glittering beads of jet. She wore black, much like Sebastian, but draped in heavy furs. She walked with a cane. She clearly didn't need using it to point and jab rather than support. "So," Beatrice said, her voice like cracking parchment. She didn't look at her son. She looked straight at Clara. "This is the creature that finally snared the wolf." Clara curtsied, keeping her chin high as Sebastian had instructed. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Your Grace. I am Clara." "I know who you are," Beatrice snapped. "Winderley's girl. Good stock, but poor. I expected Sebastian to marry a railroad heiress or a German princess. Instead, he drags a country mouse out of bed in the middle of the night." She stepped closer, sniffing the air near Clara. "And in such a rush, one wonders why." Sebastian stepped between them, his broad frame shielding Clara. "Mother, you will speak to my wife with respect, or you will find your stay at the Dower House significantly shortened." Beatrice laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Defensive. I haven't seen you this protective since you were a boy guarding your toy soldiers. Very well. Let us dine. I wish to see if she has table manners, or if she eats like a stable hand." Dinner was an ordeal. The dining room was lit by 100 candles, casting long, dancing shadows against the tapestries. The silence was only broken by the clinking of silverware and the howling of the wind outside. Beatrice sat at the side of the table, watching Clara eat every mouthful. "It is a tragedy about Arthur," Beatrice said, suddenly, slicing into her pheasant. Clara's fork clattered onto her plate. She froze. "Yes," Sebastian said, his voice even. "A tragedy. They say he died a hero." Beatrice continued, her eyes locking onto Clara's pale face. "Leading a charge? Typical Arthur, always running toward the fire. Unlike you, Sebastian. You always sit in the back and count the cost." "Someone has to pay for the fire, Mother," Sebastian replied coldly. "Did you know him well, Lady Clara?" Beatrice asked, leaning forward. My Arthur. Clara felt the room spin. She couldn't breathe. If she said yes, she risked exposing the depth of their relationship. If she said no, she was lying about the father of her child. We met socially. Your Grace, Clara stammered. He was charming. Charming, Beatrice echoed. Yes, he had a way with women. All the St. Clair men do until they get what they want. Then they turn into ice. She glanced at Sebastian. But you married Sebastian. The uncharming one. The ruthless one. I married a good man, Clara said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. She looked at Sebastian. A man who does what is right, regardless of the cost. Sebastian looked up from his wine, genuine surprise, flashing in his steel eyes. Beatrice narrowed her eyes. Touching, truly. But tell me, Clara, why are you not drinking your wine? Clara's hand went to her stomach instinctively. I have a headache, Your Grace. A headache? Beatrice smirked. Or is it a delicate condition? You look pale. And I noticed you had the maid bring ginger tea to your room this morning. I have eyes everywhere, girl. The air in the room vanished. Sebastian gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. If you are insinuating something, Mother, I am insinuating that the timeline is convenient, Beatrice hissed. A midnight marriage, a sudden retreat to the country, a pale bride refusing wine. If I didn't know better, Sebastian, I'd say you were covering up a scandal. Is she pregnant? And if she is, whose is it? You've only been married 3 days. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. The shame was a hot brand on her chest. Sebastian stood up. The chair screeched against the floor. Yes, he announced, his voice booming through the hall. She is with child, Clara gasped. Beatrice's mouth dropped open. And it is mine, Sebastian lied, his voice steady as a rock. We have been intimate for months. I compromised her honor in London. I did the honorable thing and married her before the scandal could break. Are you satisfied, Mother? Or do you wish to discuss the specifics of my bedroom activities over dessert? Beatrice stared at him, her face turning a shade of purple. The impropriety of his statement was shocking even for her. You animal, she whispered. But the suspicion in her eyes faded, replaced by disapproval. Disapproval was safe. Suspicion was dangerous. We are leaving the table, Sebastian said, walking over to Clara and offering his hand. My wife needs rest. The heir to Ashbourne needs rest. He led Clara out of the room, leaving his mother stunned in the candlelight. Once they were in the hallway out of earshot, Clara collapsed against the wall, trembling. You told her, she whispered. I told her a version of the truth she could understand. Sebastian said, his face grim. If she thought it was Arthur's, she would destroy you to protect the family line. If she thinks it's mine, she will hate you for trapping me, but she will protect the child with her life. It is a St. Clair heir now. Clara looked up at him. You took the shame on yourself. You let her think you... I don't care what she thinks of me. Sebastian cut her off. He looked tired. I never have. Go to bed, Clara. The war is just beginning. November turned to December, bringing with it a bitter frost that coated the windows of Blackwood Hall in intricate patterns of ice. Clara's belly grew a small, firm curve that she could no longer hide beneath corsets. She and Sebastian lived a strange parallel existence. They were partners in deception, allies, in a house that felt like a fortress. They ate breakfast together, discussing the estate, the tenants, and the weather. but never the past. Never Arthur. Yet Arthur was everywhere. Clara found herself drawn to the west wing. It was the closed-off section of the house where Arthur had lived during his rare visits home. Sebastian had forbidden the servants from cleaning it, and he never went there himself. One afternoon, while Sebastian was meeting with the estate manager in the village, Clara took a heavy iron key she had found in a desk drawer and made her way to the west wing. The corridor was cold, the air smelling of stale dust and old tobacco. She unlocked the double doors at the end of the hall and stepped into Arthur's sanctuary. It was exactly as he had left it, a velvet coat thrown over a chair, a half-finished game of chess. It felt like a shrine to the man she had loved. She walked to the desk, her fingers trailing over the leather-bound books. She wanted to feel close to him again, to remember the golden warmth of his laughter. She opened the top drawer. It was a mess of papers, unpaid bills mostly. Tailors, cobblers, gambling debts. Then she saw a bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon. Her heart leaped. Were these her letters to him? Had he kept them, she untied the ribbon and opened the first one. My dearest Artie. The necklace is beautiful. You spoil me. I know the Duke would be furious if he knew you pawned the family silver, but our secret is safe. It wasn't her handwriting. Clara's hands shook. She opened the next one. Darling Arthur, I cannot wait for you to return to Paris. My husband suspects nothing. Bring more gold next time. And another. To Captain St. Clair. Regarding the matter of the pregnancy of Miss Sarah Jenkins, silence can be purchased for £500. Clara dropped the letters. They scattered across the floor like dead leaves. There were dozens of them. Women. So many women. Married women, servant girls, actresses. He had written to them all the same sweet lies he had whispered to her in the rose garden. And worse, the financial records. Sebastian's name was on everything, paid by the Duke of Ashbourne, settled by Sebastian St. Clair. Arthur hadn't just been a rake, he had been a leech. He had bled his brother dry for years, all while mocking him to the world. I told you not to come in here. Clara spun around. Sebastian was standing in the doorway. He was wearing his riding coat flecked with snow. His face was unreadable. You knew, Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of grief this time, but tears of humiliation. You knew everything. Sebastian walked into the room. He didn't look at the letters. He looked at her. I knew. Why didn't you tell me? She cried. Why did you let me believe he was a hero? Why did you let me mourn him? Because you were carrying his child, Sebastian said, his voice rising for the first time. And I did not want that child to grow up knowing his father was a liar and a thief. You protected his memory, Clara accused. You hated him, but you protected him. I protected the name, Sebastian shouted, the control finally snapping. He slammed his hand against the doorframe. Do you think I enjoyed it? Watching him charm the world while I paid for his sins. Watching him take the love of our parents, the admiration of the public, while I sat in the dark balancing the books. And then he stopped, his chest heaving. He looked at Clara, his eyes blazing with a raw, intense pain. Then he took you, Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I saw you, Clara, 2 years ago, at the summer ball. You were wearing a blue dress. You laughed at a clumsy waiter, helped him pick up the glasses. I watched you from the balcony. I thought, finally someone real. Clara stared at him, stunned. You saw me. I intended to call on your father the next day, Sebastian confessed, looking away. But Arthur saw me looking at you. He saw that I wanted something, so he took it, just like he took my favorite horse when we were boys, just like he took everything. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. The coldness, the distance, it wasn't hatred. It was jealousy. It was heartbreak. "He courted me because you liked me," Clara whispered. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "He didn't love you, Clara. He seduced you to hurt me. And when he got bored or when the war called, he left. He never intended to come back for you." Clara sank onto the dusty sofa, burying her face in her hands. The man she had loved was a mirage. The man she had feared, the heartless Duke, had been the one suffering in silence. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was hesitant, light. "I am sorry," Sebastian said. "I should have burned this room. I should have burned the letters." Clara looked up at him. The steel in his eyes was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that made her chest ache. "You married me," she said softly. "Knowing all of this, knowing I was carrying the child of the man who did this to you." "The child is innocent," Sebastian said, stiffly, pulling his hand away and retreating to his usual stoic posture. "And I could not leave you to ruin. I could not watch the only woman I have ever—" He stopped himself. "I could not watch you suffer." "Say it." Clara challenged him, standing up. She walked toward him. The dynamic in the room shifted. She was no longer the victim. She was the seeker of truth. "Say it, Sebastian." He looked at her, his jaw locked tight. "I could not watch the woman I love be destroyed by my brother's ghost." The confession hung in the cold air. Clara reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough cold from the ride, but his grip was solid. "He is dead, Sebastian," she said firmly. "Arthur is dead. His lies are dead." She placed his hand on her stomach. The baby kicked a small, sudden flutter. Sebastian flinched, his eyes widening. "But this," Clara said, holding his hand there, "this is life. And you are the one who saved it. You are the father this child will know. Not him. You." Sebastian stared at her hand on his, then at her face. For a moment he looked like he might kiss her. The distance between them closed. The air crackled with a tension that was entirely new. Not fear, not anger, but desire. But then the bell in the hallway tolled loudly. "Your Grace!" It was Mrs. Higgins shouting from the bottom of the stairs. "Your Grace, come quickly! It's the tenants! The river has burst its banks!" Sebastian pulled away the mask of the Duke, slamming back into place. "I must go." "I'm coming with you," Clara said. "No, it's dangerous. The flood waters." "I am the Duchess of Ashbourne," Clara said, echoing his words from days ago. "This is my home, too. I will not sit in the dark while you save it." Sebastian looked at her with a new respect. He nodded once. "Grab your cloak and stay close to me." As they ran out into the storm, Clara realized something. She didn't just respect her husband. She was beginning to fall in love with him, and that terrified her more than any ghost in the West Wing. The storm that battered Blackwood Hall was historic. The locals would later call it the Great Flood of '92. But for Clara, it was the night the last barriers between her and Sebastian were washed away. The carriage could not make it down the flooded lane, so they rode horses. Clara, despite her condition, refused to stay behind. She sat side-saddle on a steady mare, wrapped in oilskins, watching her husband command the chaos. The village of Hollow Creek sat in the valley, and the river had swallowed the main road. The cottages of the tenant farmers were knee-deep in freezing sludge. "Get the ropes!" Sebastian roared over the gale. He was off his horse, waist-deep in the churning black water. He wasn't the Duke of Ashbourne here. He was a man with the strength of an ox hauling a cart out of the mud to free a trapped family. Clara watched him, her heart in her throat. He worked tirelessly. His expensive coat ruined his hair, plastered to his skull. He moved the elderly to higher ground. He carried children on his shoulders. "Your Grace," a woman cried out. It was Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife. "My boy Thomas. He's in the loft. The water is rising too fast." The cottage she pointed to was groaning under the pressure of the current. The foundation was giving way. Before anyone could stop him, Sebastian grabbed an axe from a farmhand and waded toward the house. "Sebastian, no!" Clara screamed, sliding off her horse. Her boots sank into the mud. He didn't look back. He kicked the door open and disappeared inside. Seconds ticked by like hours. The roof of the cottage sagged. The chimney collapsed with a splash that sent a wave of muddy water rolling toward the onlookers. "Sebastian," Clara shrieked, running forward. The estate manager, Mr. Henderson, held her back. "No, Your Grace, it's too dangerous." Just as the structure gave a final sickening crack, Sebastian emerged from the side window. He was clutching a 6-year-old boy to his chest. He waded through the debris, shielding the child with his own body, as a wooden beam crashed down where he had stood a second before. He handed the boy to his sobbing mother and collapsed onto the muddy bank, gasping for air. Clara broke free from Henderson and fell to her knees beside him. She didn't care about the mud ruining her velvet dress. She didn't care about the eyes of the tenants. "You idiot!" she sobbed, wiping the mud from his face with her bare hands. "You brave, stupid idiot!" Sebastian looked up at her, his chest heaving. He coughed up water, but his eyes were bright. "I promised I would protect what is mine. That includes them." He looked at the villagers huddled around them. For years they had thought him a miser, a cold landlord who sat in his castle counting gold. Now they saw him bleeding for them. "Get him blankets," Clara commanded, her voice ringing out with the authority of a duchess. "And open the great hall. Everyone goes to the manor. Tonight we share our fire." A cheer went up, ragged but real. But as Sebastian tried to stand, Clara felt a sharp, tearing pain in her abdomen. It wasn't a contraction. It was something wrong. She gasped, clutching her stomach. The world tilted. "Clara!" Sebastian's voice sharpened instantly. "Something is wrong," she whispered. She looked down. The mud around her knees was turning a darker shade of red. Sebastian roared for the doctor. He didn't wait for a carriage. He scooped Clara up into his arms, ignoring his own exhaustion, and ran toward the horses. "Stay with me," he growled into her ear as he mounted the horse with her in front of him. "Do not dare leave me, Clara. I just found you." The ride back to the hall was a blur of pain and rain. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness. She saw Arthur's face, then Sebastian's, the golden hero who abandoned her, and the dark wolf who saved her. "I love him," she thought, as the darkness took her. "I love the wolf." The master suite smelled of chloroform and iron. Dr. Hemsworth, a grave man with whiskers like a walrus, wiped his hands on a towel that was already stained pink. "It is too early, Your Grace," the doctor said quietly to the man standing by the window. 7 months. The child may not, and Her Grace has lost a great deal of blood. Sebastian stood like a statue. He had changed out of his wet clothes, but he felt cold to his very marrow. Save them, Sebastian said. His voice was a terrifying void. If you let them die, Doctor, do not expect to leave this county. We are doing everything. A scream from the bed cut him off. It was a raw animal sound of agony. Sebastian broke. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt by the bed. Beatrice, who had been sitting in the corner praying with a rosary, stood up to stop him. "This is no place for men, Sebastian," she hissed. "Get out of my way, Mother," Sebastian snarled. He took Clara's hand. It was limp and cold. "Sebastian," she whispered, her eyes unfocused. "The baby. Don't let Arthur take the baby." "I am here," Sebastian said, pressing her hand to his lips. "I am here. Arthur is gone. It is only us." "I love you," she breathed out. It was faint, barely a sigh. Sebastian froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Clara." "Push, Your Grace. You must push," the midwife shouted. The next hour was a blur of terror. And then silence. No cry. No scream. Just the howling of the wind outside. Sebastian stared at the small purple bundle in the doctor's hands. It was so small. "Is it?" Sebastian couldn't finish the word. The doctor turned the infant over and rubbed its back vigorously with a rough cloth. "Come on, lad. Fight!" A second passed, then 10. Sebastian felt Clara's hand slip from his. She was fading. "Clara, stay!" he commanded, panic rising. Then a sound, a thin, mewling cry, like a kitten but growing stronger. It turned into a wail. "He lives," the midwife wept. "It's a boy." Sebastian slumped against the bed frame, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. He looked at Clara. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of the cry. "He lives," Sebastian repeated to her. "We have a son." They named him Leo. Leo Arthur St. Clair. The middle name was Clara's insistence, a way to bury the ghost by acknowledging it. But the first name was for the courage of the man who raised him. Recovery was slow. For weeks, Clara was confined to bed, and Leo was kept in a warm incubator near the fire. But by the spring of 1893, life at Blackwood Hall had transformed. The gloom had lifted. The nursery was filled with light. Sebastian, the man who supposedly cared for nothing but ledgers, was frequently found sitting in the rocking chair, holding the tiny infant against his chest, reading aloud reports from the House of Lords as if they were fairy tales. One evening in late March, Clara was sitting by the fire in the drawing room. She was fully recovered, her cheeks rosy again. Sebastian was pouring brandy. "The tenants have finished rebuilding the cottages," he said, handing her a glass. "They want to name the new road Clara's Way." Clara smiled, taking the glass. "And I suppose you told them it was a foolish, sentimental waste of paint." "I told them I would pay for the sign," Sebastian said, smiling. It was a real smile. It reached his eyes. He sat down next to her on the sofa. He reached out and touched her cheek. "You said something," he murmured, his voice low. "That night, during the fever." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "I said many things. You said you loved me." Clara looked into his steel eyes. There was no point in hiding any more. The ghost of Arthur had been exorcised by the reality of the life they had built. "I do," she whispered. "I realized that night. I fell in love with a fantasy named Arthur, but I love the man named Sebastian." Sebastian leaned in. He kissed her. It wasn't the chaste kiss of their wedding day. It was deep, hungry, and filled with a possessive fire that made Clara's toes curl. For the first time, they were truly husband and wife. The next morning, the bliss was shattered. They were at breakfast, Leo cooing in a bassinet beside the table when the butler entered. He was carrying a silver tray with a single dirty envelope on it. "A letter, Your Grace," the butler said. It was hand-delivered. The courier looked rough, a sailor by the looks of him. Sebastian frowned. He picked up the envelope. It had no stamp, just a name scrawled in charcoal. The Duke. Sebastian opened it. Clara watched his face. She saw the blood drain from it instantly. The color of ash returned. "Sebastian," she asked, fear spiking in her chest. "What is it?" He didn't speak. He just let the paper fall to the table. Clara reached for it. The handwriting was shaky, as if written by a man with a fever or a trembling hand. But the loops of the L and the S were unmistakable. Brother. The reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. A debt collector's bullet missed the heart, but the fever took my memory for a time. I am in Liverpool. I have no money, but I have my name. And I hear I have a wife and a son. I am coming home to claim what is mine. Arthur. Clara dropped the letter. She looked at Sebastian. He stood up the chair, crashing backward. The wolf was back. But this time, he wasn't fighting for money or reputation. "He knows," Sebastian whispered, his hands curling into fists. "He knows about the child." "He can't take him," Clara cried, grabbing the bassinet. "He's dead. Legally, he is dead. Legally, he is the father," Sebastian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "If he returns, if he proves he is alive, our marriage is void. You are still his. And Leo is his heir." He looked at Clara, and the despair in his eyes broke her heart. "I won't let him," Sebastian vowed. "I will kill him first." The news of Arthur St. Clair's resurrection hit Blackwood Hall like a cannonball through the roof. The fragile joy of spring vanished, replaced by a siege mentality that was colder and darker than any winter storm. For 3 days, Sebastian did not sleep. He paced the perimeter of the estate, a loaded Webley revolver tucked into his coat. He hired private guards from London men with scarred faces and no questions to patrol the grounds. Clara locked herself in the nursery. She refused to let Leo out of her sight. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind in the ivy, sounded like Arthur's footsteps. "He is coming for us." The thought was a drumbeat in her skull. "He is coming to take my son. He is coming to take me back." On the 4th night, the storm returned. It was fitting. The St. Clair brothers had always been defined by turbulence. It was past midnight when the gatehouse bell rang. Sebastian was in the library, staring at the fire, drinking whiskey that tasted like ash. When the bell tolled, he didn't flinch. He set the glass down, checked the revolver in his pocket, and walked to the front door. "Stay here," he ordered the butler, who was trembling in the hallway. Sebastian walked out into the rain. The guards were already at the gate, their lanterns cutting through the blackness. They were shouting at a figure standing on the other side of the iron bars. Sebastian approached slowly. The rain slicked his hair back, revealing the sharp, predatory angles of his face. "Open the gate!" the figure shouted. The voice was raspy, broken, but undeniably familiar. Sebastian signaled the guards. They cranked the heavy iron gates open just enough for a man to slip through. Arthur St. Clair stepped onto the gravel. He was a ruin of a man. His golden hair was matted and grey at the temples. His face was gaunt, the skin yellowed by tropical fever and cheap gin. He wore a tattered sailor's coat that smelled of bilge water and rot. He looked less like a war hero and more like a corpse that had clawed its way out of a watery grave. But the eyes were the same, blue, charming, and utterly devoid of conscience. "Hello, brother." Arthur grinned. His teeth were stained. "You look prosperous. I see you've been keeping my seat warm." "You are dead," Sebastian said, his hand resting on the gun in his pocket. "We buried an empty coffin. The War Office confirmed it. The War Office is incompetent." Arthur laughed, a wheezing sound. "I was in a hell-hole prison in Bombay for a debt I couldn't pay. It took me 6 months to bribe my way out, and another 3 to stow away on a cargo ship. But I made it. Love finds a way, doesn't it?" He looked up at the manor house, his eyes hungry. "And where is she? Where is my blushing bride and our son?" "You have no wife," Sebastian said, his voice ice cold. "Clara is married to me. The child is mine." "Legally void," Arthur sneered, stepping closer. "Bigamy, Sebastian. That's a nasty word. If I am alive, your marriage is a sham. Clara is still betrothed to me by her own promise, and that child is the true heir to Ashbourne, not you." He took a step toward the house. "I'm going to see them." Sebastian pulled the revolver. He leveled it at his brother's chest. The guards stiffened but didn't intervene. They were paid by the Duke, not the ghost. "You take one more step," Sebastian said, "and I will finish what the debt collector in Bombay started." Arthur stopped. He looked at the gun, then up at Sebastian's face. He smiled. It was a terrifying, triumphant smile. "You won't shoot me, Sebastian. You're too moral. You're the good brother, the one who follows the rules. Killing an unarmed man. Your own flesh and blood. You don't have the stomach for it. Try me." Arthur laughed and took a step. "I'm going to kiss my wife, Sebastian, and then I'm going to sell this estate piece by piece to pay for the finest brothels in Paris, and you can watch." Arthur took another step. Bang! The shot didn't come from Sebastian. Arthur's eyes went wide. He stumbled, looking down at his chest. There was no blood. He looked behind him. Standing in the doorway of the manor, lit by the gas lamps, was Clara. She was holding a long-barreled hunting rifle, smoke drifting from the muzzle. She had fired a warning shot into the dirt, inches from Arthur's boot. "The next one goes through your heart," she called out. Her voice didn't waver. She wasn't the trembling girl in the rose garden anymore. She was the Duchess of Ashbourne, and she was protecting her pack. Arthur stared at her, stunned. "Clara." "My love, it's me. Artie." "Arthur St. Clair died in India," Clara yelled over the rain. "You are a stranger, and you are trespassing. "I am the father of that child," Arthur screamed, his charm dissolving into rage. "I own you. I own him. You own nothing." Sebastian stepped forward, holstering his gun. He realized now what he had to do. Violence wouldn't solve this. The law would. But not the law Arthur thought. "Arthur," Sebastian said calmly, "do you know why I paid your debts all those years?" Arthur blinked, confused by the pivot. "Because you were afraid of the scandal." "No, because I was keeping a ledger," Sebastian said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick, folded document. It wasn't a weapon. It was paper. "This," Sebastian said, holding it up to the rain, is a copy of the deed of transfer you signed 3 years ago, when you needed £10,000 to cover your losses in Monte Carlo. Do you remember what you used as collateral?" Arthur's face went pale. I was drunk. It didn't mean anything." "It meant everything," Sebastian said. "You signed away your claim to the Ashbourne title and all inheritance in exchange for the cash. You abdicated Arthur. You aren't the heir. You're just a commoner named Mr. St. Clair." "That's a lie," Arthur spat. I have the original in the vault at the Bank of England." Sebastian lied smoothly. He didn't have such a document. He had paid the debts, yes, but Arthur had never signed away his title. But Sebastian knew his brother. Arthur was a coward and a fool who didn't remember half of what he signed when he was drunk. "If you walk into a court of law to claim Clara," Sebastian continued, pressing the bluff, "I will produce this document. You will be destitute. You will have no title, no money. And I will sue you for the back payments of every penny I've given you. You will rot in debtor's prison for the rest of your miserable life." Arthur stared at him. The rain ran down his face like sweat. He looked at the document in Sebastian's hand. He looked at the rifle in Clara's hands. He did the math. 10,000, Arthur croaked. "What?" "Give me £10,000, Arthur said, his voice shaking. "Cash, tonight, and I leave. I go to America. You never see me again. I stay dead." Sebastian looked at his brother with pure pity. "You would sell your wife and son for £10,000. "I never wanted a wife," Arthur sneered. "I wanted the dowry, and the brat. He's just another mouth to feed." Sebastian felt a cold rage, but he tamped it down. This was a transaction. 5,000, Sebastian said, "and a ticket on the first steamer to New York. If you ever set foot on English soil again, I will kill you myself, and I won't use a lawyer." Arthur hesitated, then spat on the ground. "Done. Give me the money." Sebastian signaled to the butler. "Fetch the safe box." 10 minutes later, Arthur St. Clair vanished into the rainy night, clutching a bag of gold coins. He didn't look back at the woman he had ruined, or the brother he had tormented. He just ran toward the darkness, a ghost exorcised by greed. Sebastian stood in the rain until the sound of Arthur's footsteps faded entirely. He turned and walked back to the house. Clara was still standing there, the rifle lowered, her body shaking. He took the weapon from her hands and handed it to a guard. Then he pulled her into his arms. They collapsed together onto the floor of the entryway, wet, exhausted, and finally truly safe. "He's gone," Clara whispered into his wet coat. "He was never really here," Sebastian said fiercely. "He was just a bad dream. It's over." 5 years later. 1897. The garden at Blackwood Hall was in full bloom. It was no longer a gloomy fortress on a cliff. It was a home filled with laughter. A 5-year-old boy with dark curls and bright blue eyes was chasing a golden retriever through the rose bushes. "Leo, be careful of the thorns," Clara called out from the terrace. She was sitting in a wicker chair, heavily pregnant with her second child. Sebastian stood behind her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. He looked older, a few streaks of grey in his hair, but the harsh lines of his face had softened. He was no longer the Wolf of Westminster. He was just a man who had everything he wanted. "He has your energy," Sebastian noted, watching the boy. "And your stubbornness." Clara laughed, leaning her head back against his hand. "He is a St. Clair," Sebastian said. God help us. Leo tripped and fell, skinning his knee. He didn't cry. He stood up, brushed the dirt off his trousers, and ran back to the dog. "He's tough," Sebastian said, pride evident in his voice. "He had to be," Clara said softly, "to survive the storm." Sebastian leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "We all did." Inside the house, in the long gallery, where the portraits of the Ashbourne ancestors hung, there was a new addition. It wasn't a painting of a duke standing alone, looking stern and powerful. It was a family portrait. Sebastian sat in a chair, looking not at the painter, but at his wife. Clara stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. And between them, holding both their hands, was Leo. The plaque beneath it didn't list their titles or their lands. It simply read, "Sebastian and Clara St. Clair, and their son Leo. Love is the only legacy that matters." And in the corner of the frame, hidden in the shadows of the painted background, was a small detail the artist had included at Clara's request. A single withered yellow rose, a symbol of a past that was dead, and a reminder that even from the decay of a lie, the truth can bloom. And that is the story of the Duchess who was married before dawn. Sebastian St. Clair kept his promise. He never told Leo the truth about his biological father. Arthur died alone in a bar fight in New Orleans, 3 years later, unmourned and unnamed. But at Blackwood Hall, love didn't just survive. It conquered. It turns out the heartless Duke had the biggest heart of all. He just needed the right woman to unlock it. What did you think of Sebastian's decision to pay off his brother? Was it weakness, or was it the ultimate act of love to protect his family? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a daily dose of drama. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.